Hello everybody, this is Hammer Striker here. I've got a video that was on a subject requested by a viewer in a comment of what's the real difference between a cheap gun and an expensive gun. Looking at quality points and things like that. In the question, you kind of specifically wanted to ignore the finish and the trigger. I don't think you can do that, so I'm going to talk about the trigger and the finish a little bit. But there are some fundamental differences between cheap and expensive. And there are some things that it's just the name. If it's got the FN name on it, you are going to pay more for it, put a period. But do you get anything more for that? So as I kind of go through this Taurus and the FN, this is an FN 509. This is the tactical version, so it's kind of the top of the line of the 509. And this is the Taurus G3c, which comes in two versions. This is the Toro, so it's kind of the top of the line of the Taurus GC3, and there's a version that's not the Toro. The difference between the two is optics ready capability. And I'm going to bring in a couple other guns throughout this to illustrate certain points. But when you talk about cheap or expensive, that can be very depending on the person. I mean, what's cheap to me may be expensive to you or vice versa. So if you're driving a Lamborghini, then nothing on this table is going to be considered expensive. So I do want to say the baseline would be something like this Glock. So Glock is kind of considered one of the standards of reliability and basic function. They're not fancy, they don't have any real super fancy features, but they work, and they work reliably, and they work 100% of the time. And these are in the 500s, 550, that kind of territory. They kind of go up and down, but if you say this is the center point, things that are less expensive than this would be on the inexpensive side, and things more expensive than this would be on the high expensive side. So I'm going to set him aside because we're not talking about middle of the road, but we kind of need to understand what that is. So let's talk about this Taurus. So it has kind of a crappy finish. You can see that this gun is a review gun. So neither one of us has carried this. We haven't had it at competitions. We haven't done any torture tests. We don't do torture tests on the channel. So what you look at on this finish is just what happened with normal routine use, taking it to the range, sticking it in a range bag, being hit by spent brass, etc. When you look at the poor finish, it's going to wear here, and then it's going to rust. So here's a spot where you're going to start to see rust on this gun if you were to be carrying this. It probably will never rust in my possession because it's kept in the safe for the most part. I don't carry this. But if you're carrying this, it's up against your sweaty body, then it's probably going to rust over time. So when you're making a comparison between inexpensive and expensive, you really can't ignore the finish. You can ignore whether it's pretty or not, shiny, fancy, but focus on the finish, because a crappy finish is going to wear poorly. You take something like this FN, and the finish on this is in excellent condition, and it's been treated to the same condition. There's a little bit of dirt on it here, I think, but it's been treated to the same conditions and the same handling that Taurus was. So one of the things that higher end tends to buy you is better finish, better materials quality. Just like knives, two knives can be equally shiny and equally good looking, but one is made of a much higher quality material or metal than the other. In a higher end gun, you're more likely to have high-end metals used. And one of the things that I kind of didn't talk about, I talked about the middle being in the 500 territory. This is a sub $300 gun. So for the Taurus, the Toro version's just under 300, and the non-optic version, the non-Toro version's like around 250. And this FN 509 is MSRP is over 1100, and even the cheapest in this particular 509 line without the threaded barrel and all the tactical features is right around 750 to 800. So the ticket to enter the 509 territory from FN, mid sevens into eights. Ticket to enter here, low to mid twos. So you can see the ends of the scale. Now from a reliability perspective, both guns that are in my hand have been reliable. You would have a higher expectation potentially of a high-end gun being reliable, or very reliable. However, that's not true. This Hudson, this is a Daniel Defense. It's actually based on the Hudson design they bought. It's an H9. This is a very expensive gun. It's a metal gun. It's a nice looking gun. But this one has not been reliable. And even after a fair break-in period, it's still kind of ornery and temperamental. So expensive doesn't always mean that you're not going to have any problems with it. And at the cheaper end of the scale, this original High Point, big, clunky, ugly thing, not really that ugly, but some people think they are, has been dead reliable from the first round to the last round. And these original ones, when I got this one, was sub 200. So it is possible to get a reliable gun. But there's a few annoying features on this. So for example, if I pull it back and I lock it back, there's no slide stop slide release. So to release this, I have to eject the mag, operate the slide, and then put the mag back in. And if I do that, the trigger on this one is kind of vague and kind of bad. It's not hideous, but it's not a very good trigger. So cheap gun, kind of a crappy trigger, really not ergonomic. Takedown procedure, you have to punch pins out, and you'll often find that on low-end guns. You know, the takedown procedures are not highly refined. Now this takes down like a Glock, so again, you can get inexpensive guns that have good quality, but from a feature perspective, this has kind of got the minimal feature set. No replaceable back straps. It is optic ready, but when you look at the machining quality of things, like the barrel hood is wearing significantly. The materials, the finish on the barrel is wearing significantly. Now you'll see sometimes marks on Glocks and other guns, but it doesn't erode the finish. And this, by the way, is fairly low round count. Sights is another thing. You know, this has got kind of cheap, low-end plastic sights. They work, but if you had to do much with them, you'd probably have trouble. If you tried to move these around too much, they'd probably chip or crack. If you look at this high-end gun, it's got nice sights. It's got a a tritium with a ring front sight, but overall it's an adjustable sight. So there's a lot of features you pick up when you move into the higher end territory. So let's look at machining quality. So I have another FN here. This is a 509. This came off one that's not the tactical, so you're looking at the 7s to get into this. And the machining is flawless. The barrel is perfectly machined. Things like that. If I move over to look at the fire control group, it has extra auto battery protection. Actuators here that mate with cutouts in the slide. If I can get the camera to focus, you can see it up at the top behind me right here. So there's redundant safeties. The camera's wanting to be temperamental today, trying to zoom in. There's redundant safeties beyond the normal safeties of the inertial toggle and the drop safety piston, which these have. Now this Taurus, which again, going back to the cheap guns, has the basic safeties. It's got the inertial toggle and the drop safety, but no redundancy. It's got the safeties that are necessary to make it safe. And I would say the Taurus is a drop safe gun. But in the conditions of weird ammo conditions and things like that, the less expensive gun may be a little more likely to malfunction under those extreme conditions than a more expensive one. Another characteristic, this XDM. Now the XDM line is kind of somewhere between the middle of the road, the Glocks, and somewhere between the high end, depending on which model you get. But some of the features you're going to see on this, beyond just the flawless machining, nickel boron coated fire control group. That's going to result in a more smooth and a more consistent trigger. So that as you're pulling this trigger, of course I can't now because it's disassembled, you're going to just get a consistent, smooth, really good trigger. These XDMs have really good triggers. And another feature that you're going to tend to find more on a high-end gun than a low-end gun is additional polishing, such as polished chambers and polished feed ramps. And the camera is really being ornery today. Polished feed ramps. So you're going to get more reliable loading of different types of ammo in something like this. So flawless rifling, that's one of the things I'll show you too. The quality and the sharpness of the rifling. Okay, this is the XDM again. Rifling is super sharp and super clean. And I don't care what XDM I pick up, or for that matter, any Springfield I pick up, that rifling quality is going to be very high. Of course, you're a little bit pricier than some of the low-end guns. Taurus's, the rifling quality is good, it's functional, but it tends to kind of just meet the minimum. This specific one, the machining of the barrel is good, but the TX22, you can look at our reviews on the TX22, the Taurus, it's a 22 caliber, 22 LR, that had numerous problems with barrel leading. And the ones that we actually had for that review had that problem. A replacement barrel was sent. It was actually worse. Then another replacement barrel was sent that finally took care of it. So that consistency, and that's another thing. When we looked at the various Tauruses, you'd go to a gun store, you'd handle one, and the trigger would behave a certain way, and the field and the smoothness of the slide would be a certain way. You'd pick up another one, and it would be very different. The trigger would feel different. It would be grittier. It would break at a different point. The slides would be smoother or not smoother. When I pick up one of these, if I picked up 100 of these and operated the trigger and cycled the slide, I wouldn't be able to tell you the difference between one and the 100th. They're all going to be identical and consistent. The reason for that, of course, is material quality, higher material quality, as well as higher quality control, tighter tolerances. For a 509 to leave the factory, the quality inspections that are done and the requirements that it has to meet are much more stringent than for a Taurus to leave the factory. In many cases, lower end guns tend to farm out a lot of the operation, and you'll get tolerance stacking where the one part is still in tolerance, but it's at one end and another part's at the other end. When you have more higher end guns, most of the manufacturing tends to be done in-house, and when it's not, when it is farmed out, the requirements are much higher on the returned product. A few of the other things now gets down to features. So in the lower end guns, you don't get replaceable backstraps. I mentioned that. Most of the middle to higher end guns these days are coming with one or more replaceable backstraps. Many of them are coming with either ambidextrous or reversible magazine catches. A lot of them are having ambi slide stop slide release, especially even like the Glock Gen 5s. Glock's finally gotten on the bandwagon with that. Features like Picatinny rails and threaded barrels start to become available to you. To kind of wrap up and summarize what I'm talking about here, because I talked about a bunch of different things. Quality control, materials quality, features, and consistency are the big thing that will vary as you go across the spectrum. At the lower end of the spectrum, you may still get a good gun. This is actually a good gun. It works. It's reliable. Now, is this going to be a 50,000 round gun? Generally not. As you move up the spectrum, you tend to generally start to get a little bit more features and more reliability and tighter quality control. Move into the Glock and the XDM territory. You're starting to get the replaceable back straps and that little bit closer tolerances and consistency. And as you move up towards the top of the scale, you're starting to get all of that kind of doubled down. Additional quality control, refinement, and materials quality. And even things like this P30SK, this H&K. H&Ks are notoriously expensive. They're also very, very good, very high quality. Every part on this just has a good solid look and feel. Everything just works like it should. Ergonomics are good, that when the safety's in the off position so that I can fire it, the safety on the other side doesn't bite into my hand. All that attention to detail as you move up in territory. But just remember, just like cars or anything else, cheap doesn't mean bad. This is actually a good gun. Believe it or not, that's actually a good gun. Expensive doesn't mean good. I got that H9 over there. And I've had some other expensive guns that haven't worked well. So you look at the quality and what you're getting and make sure you're getting the right features. But don't go by price alone and don't go by name alone. Just because it's a Taurus doesn't mean it's a bad gun. Just because it's an FN doesn't always mean it's a good gun, even though in my experience I haven't had a bad FN yet. So my chances with an FN are probably better than potentially with a Taurus, for example. So hopefully I answered the question for the person that asked. Hopefully if you weren't the one that asked the question, you found it interesting or potentially useful. But beyond that, if you like our videos, please give us a thumbs up, share, subscribe, click that bell up there to be notified if you do. Check us out on Facebook, Instagram, Player, Rumble. We're pretty much everywhere. And thank you.